The Origin of Sky by Chelsea Herrington. Chapter 1. The Lake and the Mountain. Time had stopped. Any who once kept it had stopped. Nonetheless, the lake felt aware of each passing moment. Something was happening, was coming, and it would be here soon. The lake didn't know why it knew this. It was a night where the gray sky, usually a blanket of glittering stars, was hidden by thick clouds. The water, swirling in its banks, waited out the cold its top layer had already given into. A frigid, rushing wind rocked the coniferous woods, spattering snow across its ice. The lake was deep and motionless, dark, but not quite black, and stretched in a long, thin trail for many miles. The valley was most often calm, and it rarely flooded or shrank. It was nestled deep in the old valley, curled around the mountain beside it, and crowded by dark green woods everywhere else. For many ages, it continued this way, witnessing the seasons, listening to the wind, feeling from the rain and watching the world change. But this sensation of moments passing, a realization of time, this was new. A stranger approached the shore. The ground was hard, as was the ice. The weather so bitter, only the most desperate would brave it. This person, however, clad head to toe in heavy pelt and fur, fully obscured and in the middle of such lonely, empty wilds, did not look troubled. Their walk was slow, steady, and confident, neither tripping nor struggling to traverse the treacherous snowbanks. The lake, for its part, was very interested. Rarely had anyone ventured to its shore, and never in the winter. Slowly, with great purpose, the figure strode out on top of the ice. It was a very strange sensation. The lake felt it keenly every time the figure's boot struck. Snow scattered, flying wildly away for meters, revealing the hard ice below. The lake felt trepidation rising. It had never felt much of anything, and this was an unfamiliar sensation, a full awareness of the moment. The figure traveled to the exact deepest part of the lake and stood there, its destination seemingly reached. The figure was still for a moment. Water ebbed under the frozen surface. Light snow gently billowing off the peaked mountain caps dusted down. A wind traveled through, swirling and pattering the trees. The figure pulled a bundle from within their cloak and held a small package out. They held the object very carefully in both hands, and it was wrapped completely in cloth and wool. The fabric was coarse and the same blackened blue as the lake in summer. The figure, with ceremonious care, stood low and laid the bundle down upon the ice. Standing back up with the same slow reverence, the figure looked around and raised both hands, sweeping them in a circular motion. The clouds above, a steady gray mass, broke and crumbled apart with the motion. Roiling away from the stranger, they disappeared far over the mountain, far beyond sight. The wind ceased to howl, curling away and around, stilling the rustling of the banks. All snow was swept from the lake's icy surface and for miles around, far out of sight. The figure put down their hands and walked away, across the reflective, frozen surface until they were back in the woods the way that they had come. When they were not that much further, a little beyond the ice now gleaming, the figure collapsed. Formless cloth and fur drifted down, dust and ash pouring forth, scattering across the snow. How odd! The lake pondered this for a moment, but the figure was gone, unlike the package they had left, so the lake turned its attention to the bundle. This curious object placed over its most central point. The lake wished to study this thing, to view it for what it was, but was unable to glimpse inside. The lake felt a kinship to the package, wrapped in those deep, desaturated blue-blacks of its own color. It also felt sorry for it, this small thing left alone in the middle of nowhere. Nothing lived here, after all. The lake felt responsible, its dark, uninviting color, not a nice color blue or green. Its cloudy, miasmic tones were probably why no animal or fish lived in it, and no human had dared swim its shallows. Other lakes, glacier clear and fed from the distant mountain chains, must seem so much more inviting. The banks of those lakes saw much life. But here, in these secluded woods, not even migrating creatures came to drink. But perhaps this little bundle, dressed in kindred colors, had come here for a reason. The lake felt small comfort in that. So wrapped in its contemplation, the lake failed to notice the package had started to move. It was rocking back and forth. A sudden and gusty wail bellowed out from the wrappings, startling the calm silence that had fallen over the woods and valley. At first, the lake felt afraid. What kind of horrible thing could it contain? Then a foot broke free from the cloth, and a hand, and another. The bundle was becoming undone, revealing a child, a babe, struggling in the cloth, crying desperately. The lake started in remembrance. Over the countless ages, it had seen many of these. That being had left a baby here, on the surface of the ice. The lake felt an unusual panic again. These things, like all mortal beings, needed providence, nutrients, care. Things the lake had none of. How could the thing survive here? How could the lake help? It looked the length of its shores, searching as far as it could see for an answer, something to be done about this predicament. But no answer presented itself. Could this creature also freeze over and wait out the winter? No, that didn't seem right. But it would freeze soon enough anyway. No home, no fire, nor spot of warmth existed anywhere nearby. It was then that a thought occurred to the lake, a foreign thought, a whispered thought that couldn't have been the lake's, a thought both exciting and frightening. It felt, deep in the core of its nature, some unstoppable power growing. It had witnessed this power, but never felt it. It had seen an avalanche about to fall from the mountain, the rocks beginning to cascade, the force of inevitable destruction already sweeping out. But at its base, a village sat, one the mountain had learned to care for. So using power much like what the lake felt now, the mountain had, with all its will, called back its boulders and put them back in place. The lake leaned into the new power, allowing the mystery of this night to influence it. Its banks, here and there, began to thaw. Maybe it was because the action was so small and the rest of existence so vast that the change went entirely unnoticed. Or simply because this thin dark lake, so far from anything, had been all but forgotten over the years. Except by the mountain. The mountain watched the lake, had watched this entire event with deep unease. The mountain feared what the lake was undergoing, feared it because it felt it too. Something was happening tonight. Maybe not good or entirely bad. The waters under the ice were choppy with unease when the mountain's voice resounded out across the valley to the lake below. It was a grave voice, as deep as timeless age, and sorrowful as one who had seen so much. It spoke as quietly as it could, tampering its sounds through the waters. "Lake, what have you got there?" The lake lapped violently in surprise. Not only was it jarred out of its thoughts, knowing that child's life was still in immediate danger, but it had never heard the mountain speak. Desperately searching for words, it eased its waters and focused on the mountain. "Well, that is to say, it seems to be a child," the lake stammered. "But please, O wise mountain, you must understand. I cannot watch this being die upon my surface in this harsh winter. Please, I must try to save the poor thing." The lake frothed, agitated, confused and frightened, lost in emotion it had never felt. If the mountain could, it would smile. "You know nothing about the care of children, for mortals of any type at all, do you?" it asked firmly, voice somber and authoritative. "With such limited knowledge, you will surely kill it." Uneasily, the waters receded inward. Yes, you're right," it burbled. "But I can figure this out. It must not be so hard." Could a lake really do anything for a mortal baby? What an absurd idea. It couldn't even figure out why it cared so much, or why it was feeling in the first place. It had no idea of where to even begin to understand all of this. All it could think of was the warmth flowing in, thawing the ice, and those wailing, desperate, needy calls it wanted to answer. Its banks were all but free of ice now, the middle still frozen in a large, shifting white pane. I respect your confidence, Lake, but you will not have time. The child will require feeding very soon, and warmth, an element cannot hope to provide. The mountain felt such pity. There was no easy answer here. The waters twisted and swirled in agitation, small cracks forming in the ice from the violent frothing. Please, mountain, you must know, surely you must know a way to keep it from death. You must know what I can do. It was just abandoned here, in the middle of nowhere, forgotten. Such an awful fate. It's too cruel, I can't bear it. The mountain was quiet as it thought. It really was too cruel. There was a heavy noise in the air, the falling of pebbles and rocks. A couple struck the ice's surface, spraying cold water as they broke the thinning layer and sunk below. Lake, I know one way. I felt it within, and I think you do too. One way to keep the baby alive, but it will mean the end of you, and there will be no undoing it. You will have to abandon all that you consider vital, all that you are. The lake listened with a certain ominous silence. There is a way for eternal elements like us to do this. You will separate yourself forever from your waters, and bind yourself in flesh. You will no longer be the lake, but you won't be mortal either. A permanent existence, caught between two. These waters that you feel yourself to be, will become a stranger to you. The voice was stern, but quiet, a low tone to match the importance of the subject. The lake despaired. Surely there's another option. Its water frothed and rumbled thunder echoed out, bouncing across the lonely valley. For so many centuries, so many endless days, the lake had existed, relishing the summer heat, setting the golden leaves afloat to other places far away, enjoying the lush, cooling spring rains falling in its delicate patterns. It had fed the plants of the shores and watched the wind, heard its stories. This valley, it loved it, had been a part of it, and never felt a single moment of sadness or regret. The water anguished. Large chunks of broken ice bobbed in and around it, flowing downstream, piling together and dipping down. The bank's frozen silt uprooted and scattered, until it heard the crying. Perched precariously on the surface now rocking, the sound rang loud, calling out to the lake. Almost crying itself, it knew what had to be done. It could not blame the mountain, or the child, or even itself. Not even the figure who had started this in the first place. There was no space for that. Feeling heavy sorrow, it spoke. Tell me what to do. It is simple. Resolve in yourself this choice fully, with all of your desire, and then close your eyes. When you open them again, if you can, you will be mortal. What if this is my end, mountain? The lake said in a terrified whisper. Then what will happen to the little one? I promise you, Lake, that if you do not awaken, I will do it myself. I will care for the baby. The lake roiled back. The mountain would risk their eternity for this? That was too much for the lake to accept. A heavy rumble rocked the valley, throwing massive rocks, rolling down into the woods of its base. Are you ready to try it now? The mountain asked. The lake trembled and watched the ice floe drifting. The little babe was struggling so much, red-faced and desperate. That strange power was growing unbearable. Yes, its voice was a tiny whisper. The lake was afraid, but there was something else there too. The idea to leave the valley. It had never thought of that before, never even considered it, never considered what it might see if it could leave the borders of these shores. What existed that the water didn't see? What was over those horizons? The brooks, the streams that fed the lake, the places they came from. It wanted to see beyond. It wanted to see the origin of it all. The mountain spoke again. It wasn't words so much as a low hum, a vibration, perhaps a hymn of some ancient language the lake did not know. The sound vibrated through the waters and filled the valley. The cracking ice broke fully, snapping in 1,000 places at once, sending great sprays into the chilled air. All flowed down the river course, all but the babe. Something stirred in the lake. Something beyond itself filled it entirely. It held the visions in its mind, feeling less fear, feeling more. Like a widening of its already great sight, the lake saw so much in these moments. The burst of awakening, the severed cord of impossibility, the humming was a severed drum of primal hope, seeing further and deeper, delving far below the depths of the ocean and high above the stratosphere. The lake saw a world of water, a world of its own. It felt the floods rush in and overtake, felt the answers to everything in the heart of the universe itself, of everything and all that ever existed, the secrets behind all the millennium and worlds and universes and heavens above. The lake's eyes flickered closed, sinking into blackness. And then they opened. The lake was bent over, shivering, naked and terribly cold. Clutched to his chest was the bundle. The babe was wriggling and making frustrated noises, but no longer screaming. He rocked it softly, struggling with the odd, lumpy appendages that were his fingers to sort out the cloth. It pulled back slightly, and he finally saw the poor thing. Cold and so fierce, fighting against the binding cloth. Hair of spun silver on soft, cool skin. The child's eyes were filled with stars. The lake started and gasped in hard, feeling the burning need for the air inside, drawing breath for the first time. His flickering eyes scanned the ground. He was crouched in the forest, in the snow. His breath came fast and flooding, in and out, again and again. Oxygenating new lungs, new trembling hands, new blood. He glanced down at the small thing, its legs moving wildly, cheeks still very red and puffed out. He swallowed breath, in and out again. The muscles of his arms flexing, the lungs in his chest fluttering. He felt lightheaded and so small and impossibly alone. It was hard to understand, like the rush of images and thoughts and kindred voices always present had left. He no longer saw how much, but felt too keenly. He could not see all the way to the distant mountains or down the ebb and creek waters to the little glens hidden throughout the woods. He could not hear the happy sing-song voices of the streams and the gravel-coated murmurs of the pebbled silt. He felt entirely singular. The babe grabbed his arm clumsily and made a high-toned whine, rocking its little body back and forth. He started and piled the remaining wrappings around the child, looking up and around to gain his bearings. He was in the woods. The snow compacted under his bare legs felt like tiny pricks, uncomfortable, but not entirely painful. Ranging in front of him, the mountain loomed, stoic and towering, beautiful and strong. The lake's eyes widened as he looked from her slender toes covered by the snow up to her long weaving locks falling down her back. She smiled and leaned down, offering him a hand. "I couldn't allow you to do this on your own, my friend." Her eyes crinkled, little lines etched in her face. He stared in shock, clumsily taking the offered hand while cradling the child carefully. She was 6 feet, maybe taller, long hair dripping down just past her shoulders, crinkled and stone gray. Her eyes were soft, her irises so pale they were hard to see, but certainly there, mingled gently, light brown and blue. Her skin was toned like argillite and nickel. She gripped his hand, her touch assured and assuring. "Why, Mountain? Why would you do this also?" "I do this for you, Lake. I do this for that child. I do it for the newborn innocence. I have grown tired of watching the passage of the world. From my lofty high point there I saw it all. Everything for miles. I saw everything I wished to see, and so much I wished I could not." She glanced over the valley. Her gaze had drifted on forever. seeing even the universe move in its exotic limbo toward a coming end. I filled my time with regrets and little else. No, to walk across the land, to see less, to inflict change, I have left enough to fate. Come. She pulled him to his feet. I know of a place that we can hide from the freeze. He staggered up, clutching her hand, and then shoulder, his own slopping legs bowing out like a calf, uncertain and clumsy. His grip on the infant, however, remained strong. He took one step, sinking into the snow and kiltering off balance, then leaning back, overcompensating. She laughed. It was deep and lovely to hear. He smiled too, taking another step and looking cautiously out over the frozen trail, focusing on balance and the babe more than anything else. It took him a moment to realize that he was beside the lake. He glanced over, his smile faltering momentarily. He stood still, leaning on the mountain, clutching both her and the child. The lake flowed gently, the ice still broken, not yet refreezing. Those dark waters, his entire being, everything that he was and ever wanted to be. The soft, wide, radical arcs of the water's dance mesmerized him, rippling across and rushing down. He couldn't even see the other shore, just the faint, black-feathered shadow that was the forest way over there. He stared for a while, looking down into the depths, his memories a cluttered series of instances and singular moments. He remembered the darkness, the constant shift, what it felt like to be a plural. His companion looked down at him and over at the lapping waves, the upheaval of earlier calmed now. He was caught up in staring, and he did not notice her gaze. He was shorter than her by a foot. His skin was soft and his hair feathered. It sprayed from behind his ears, reaching to the base of his neck. It was so sheer it was reflective, in tone the same color as the waters that they gazed over, but in it she could see mirrored other colors. He was graceful, long articulate fingers and curving spine, made of a certain pliancy and gentle charm. She glanced away and up, far, far above the trees at the mountain peak. The silhouetted dark shape of herself, once herself, stood sharp against the starry night. Its peak was an arrowhead, a direction, a statement. Her memories came back, tormenting in a rush, a mounting pile of thoughts, echoes, and deep truths weighing on her. The child wriggled, softly struggling, its miserable cries the only sound in the lonely woods. She wrapped one arm around the lake, gently pulling him to her and away from the lake and the mountain. She slowly guided them deeper into the trees, with care for the ice and unforgiving terrain. The cold numb of her feet began to spread up her legs to her arms, her chest, her face, and ears. She could see the red blood rising in her companion's face as well, and hurried them along. He held the child and remained distant, his thoughts so far away he missed it the first time that she'd said they were here. Every part of him hurt, the cold and eating thing, and he kept trying to glance back the way that they came. They ducked under the pile of rocks and shoved aside snow, revealing a long sealed wooden door. It was a home of some sort, buried in the woods. She let go of him a moment and gripped the old wood at the edge, heaving it open. It scraped against the ground, revealing a small downward sloping passage. "What is this place?" He looked at her, confused and curious, hefting the babe up to his shoulder. It had begun to moan and sob again. The wrappings kept slipping here and there, and the blanket had gotten wet at the edges. "It's a safe place for now, the home of someone from long ago." He cocked his head cautiously and followed her down into the shaded entrance. It opened out into a round room, made from heavy stone. The floor was a radical pattern of locking brickwork. Little carved images of flowers decorated the corners. The roof was bent in and collapsed in one corner. There was a fire pit, surviving furniture, a stack of old wood, and musty but still intact clothes of various sizes. "Oh," he smiled, eyes lighting up. He made his way to a patchwork blanket draped over a small stool, near tripping in haste. He took it and sat on the ground, rewrapping the child with care in the new, dry, and somewhat musty quilt. His fingers were clumsy from the cold, and the stone seared against his already stinging thighs. He looked over. His companion was by the pit. She had placed logs in it and was vigorously striking a fire starter, her hands shaking. Together, sitting on the cold stone, they worked a pile of small lint and moth-eaten cloth in a heap beneath the near-fossilized dried wood, fingers almost useless. Their new skin was cold, thick and unresponsive. Finally, with a desperate strike, a spark caught in the soft threads, starting a blaze. They sat close, huddled against each other, feeling warmth and the hungry need for it for the first time. Blankets and the remains of outfits that they piled around themselves and the child, staying close and keeping the fire alive, feeling nothing but the warmth and how much colder the cold seemed now, having felt the fire's heat. The baby kept on crying. The mountain took the child and found that she could feed it, this young spawking thing. It was a little boy, hungry, cold, and so miserable. The lake drifted down, sinking into the warmth and the comfort of the cloth and furs. Her hand was resting on his shoulder, and he felt content, wrapped around her on the floor in their fort of blankets and clothing. How odd, he thought. He had spent so much of his existence just like this, but he had never felt this much concern, this future fear. What was going to happen now? Where would they go, and what would they do? He sank further down, mind working over the questions that he could not possibly hope to answer. His eyes heavy and body exhausted. In minutes, his breath slowed to a gentle in and out, and those troublesome thoughts faded to a quiet buzzing noise in the back of his mind. It was in this way that he discovered sleep. When he awoke, the mountain was asleep as well. She had lain down next to him, the child so carefully placed between them. It was softly breathing, small eyelids moving. Seeing her now, he felt so happy that he wasn't alone. He would have never found this place without her. She was beautiful. Coarse, long hair, ashen and dark, slate fell messily around her jaw. Her body was powerful, with strong legs, a thick chest, and defined neck, arms, and hands. She was built of strong angular precision, not delicate, but soft and lovely at the same time. She looked impassive and untroubled. He hoped he might also feel so secure in the time to come. The lake was by the entrance some days later. They had slept and searched the room for supplies and hidden treasures and dried food when the need finally hit. The cold outside nipped horribly when more wood needed to be brought in, but the stone room retained the heat quite well. Now, he held the child in his lap and sat looking up the staircase, gaze distant. His eyes were similar in color to his hair, the slightest blue tint, muddled in deep gray, set against translucent skin. He hadn't spoken in hours, merely stared, rocking the child gently and stroking the soft, downy hair on the babe's head. He felt so lost in the textures of the world, the gravel touch, the cold stone, and the soft, delicate, light press of warm flesh against his own. How coarse and soft the feeling of clothing was against his arms, across his back. He stared when his companion touched his shoulders, sliding down next to him. "It feels too much, doesn't it?" He smiled at her and nodded, his gaze shifting to her, then back to the door. "What a strange, lonely thing it is to be immortal." He cradled the baby, playing with the little creature's fingers. He shook the fog from his mind and breathed in, looking over her with concern. He spread the blanket that he wore to cover his shoulders as well. "Here, Mountain, I can't have you freeze now." She looked at him for a long moment, accepting the blanket with one hand, her smile amused. "You know, Lake, I feel these titles could use a change, don't you? They just don't fit us so well anymore. Perhaps something more personal. The babe could use one as well. You want a name?" The lake cocked his head, eyes widening a little. "Well, that's an interesting thought. I suppose we could come up with something suitable." "Oh, I already know what I shall be called. An old name, something I heard a long time ago. I am no longer the one to break the sky, nor am I a great eternal. I am small. I tread the earth and shall cultivate its bounty. But still I'm strong. I am known as Adira of the mountain." Her smile crinkled her eyes. She felt at home in herself for the first time since the cloaked figure had appeared. The lake swallowed and nodded, looking around at the walls, then resting on her. "I don't know what to call myself. I barely understand what this self is. Come up with something for me too, Adira. And maybe I can try to think of a name for the baby." He gently adjusted his hold. "He's so little. It's hard to imagine him grown, but I suppose he will all the same. I want to call him something that will suit him his life through." He frowned and thought. "Something important. The most important name that I know." Adira nodded and leaned back in thought. The lake drifted off into memory once again, a flowing conscious stream of every moment he could rightly recall of all history and the times that came before and after. He smiled. "Yes, I know a name for this child. It was held long before him, and I think it'll fit him through the years to come. He will be called Theodore." He traced his fingers in the babe's soft hair, making little swirls. Theodore stirred with a small murmur, shifting, his lips puckering before settling again. Adira chuckled, then leaned in, kissing the small boy softly. "That is a perfect pick, my friend. For you, I think a melodic name, something gentle, but as steadfast as you have proven. You should be Bo." "That sounds lovely, Mount Adira. I love it. Bo." "Yes." He looked down at his hands, his curled legs. He nodded to himself. "I will be Bo of the Dark Lake." "Good. Then let me say something else tonight before we sleep. Something that I've been pondering. The world is vast, Bo, and wondrous. We've both seen it, in part, here and there, these little pieces of it. But to actually walk the land, that's entirely different." He nodded, sliding down further, his back pressed against the wall. "With the time that we have left, I think that we should go. I don't want to live here much longer than we need," she said. "Where should we go, Adira?" Bo cocked his head curiously, laying Theodore down to bed. "Anywhere. Everywhere. I don't care. I just want to see what we can with this time." She sighed and crawled over, leaning against the wall. "Wherever you want to go, I will be happy to go as well, just as long as we see something new." Her gaze traveled up to the sunken rocks of the roof, studying their textured bend. Bo frowned and looked away too, back up the stairs, falling silent. He wrapped the blanket around his legs and leaned back, feeling tired. He did want to leave. "There is one place, Adira. One place that I want to go. I don't even know if it really exists, but if it does, well, it seems like it must be the most special place in the world." He rubbed his arms and looked over at her. She was relaxed, but attentive. "I have heard there is this place where the sky touches the earth. No, that isn't even it. More than that. It is the very origin of the sky. It is the place where the stars spiral from and converge again. It is the end of everything and the birthplace as well. That is where I want to go." The crackle of the little fire was the only noise in the room as she nodded, thinking this over. She felt the patterns in her clothing, the ridges dripping down her resting legs, finally placing her hand over his, following the gentle slope of his wrist. "I know of this place. It's beyond my vision, or beyond what used to be my vision. But I know the way. I think it's dangerous, sacred. I don't know if we will make it all the way." When he looked down, disappointed, she lifted his chin with her extended hand. "I don't know if it's possible to go. But we may as well try, Bo. When we feel ready, perhaps as the cold recedes, we'll go, and we'll see the origin of the sky." You really think that it's worth it, to make the trip? It's wonderful. I wish we could leave now." He bubbled with excitement and sat up straighter, his deep eyes alight with the possibility. "Well, I would love to leave soon, but not in the cold with this child, or our own inexperience. We'll certainly never make it if we die along the road to bad weather." She lapped the words and leaned in closer, entangling her fingers to his. "I wonder still. I'm not excited about staying the winter in this hovel. Please don't misunderstand. We'd have perished without it. But it is hardly anything to see, and most of this area I already know as well." "Well, if that's the case, maybe I can bring you some joy in our stay here with a tale. This tale is from an age when the stars did not crowd so close. I suppose you don't recall the one who made this home in the first place, do you?" He paused and thought. So many ages had passed. He doubted he could recall something like that. Some small moment, a single voyager in all of history that he'd seen. "No, I don't recall. I think this home used to be much taller, perhaps. But that's about it." You could see over the whole valley, so I suppose you saw more." "Yes," she nodded and settled in further. "I remember the one who lived here. He was a tower maker and a singular, gracious man. The time that he spent here was as enchanting as it was heartbreaking. This tale is of perhaps the most significant moment of his life, and a legacy that has sat with me all the ages that have come since. What happened so long ago in this valley, what he wished for, changed everything to come after. In part, it's why we're here now." She breathed out, her gaze distant, before looking over with that small, joyful smile. "This is a story of Joseph."